lights went out in the tunnel, and the eyes appeared. The lights went out in the tunnel, and the eyes appeared. The first loss was practical. A hum swallowed, bulbs sputtered, and the familiar orange glow collapsed into a throat of black. Maya stopped, because anything that stops a city at night asks for attention, because the wet tiles smelled of old rain and something else she couldn't name, because she'd learned to read small dangers as if they were weather. In that dark, the eyes were not animal or human. They were pinpricks of attention, patient and cold, arranged in rows like watchful punctuation. She listened for some rational sound: traffic, an off-key radio, the hiss of pipes, but the tunnel ate them all. The eyes blinked, slow and deliberate, not together, but in patterns that suggested counting. When she raised her phone, the screen threw up a thin cone of light that made the eyes recoil as if from exposure. They did not scatter like animals. They adjusted, repositioning to preserve a certain geometry. Her breath sounded too loud, and in that sound, she felt the distance between her and whatever watched her widen into a kind of measurement. She had walked this way 100 times: Iris's cafe closing shift, the late trains fogging her thoughts, and never once believed a tunnel could change its mind about being ordinary. Tonight, it felt like a mouth with teeth, arranged to count rather than chew. The eyes made her think of things that had nothing to do with tunnels. Childhood games where someone always kept score, the way her mother used to count breaths to lull a tense house. Counting turned private into accountable. The dots responded as if they understood the syllables of memory, not light. She tried to speak, first asking out loud if anyone was here, then calling a name she hadn't used in years, because names have weight. Her voice returned to her worse for wear, altered by echo into something thinner. The eyes answered not in sound, but by aligning, blinking a slow sequence as if they were marking off moments. Panic, she noticed, is formal. It makes one count steps and seconds, as if moving on a ledger. Maya began to step backward, unconsciously calculating escape routes, as the eyes rehearsed their invisible arithmetic. Her phone lost bars. The signal icon shrank, then winked out. The city beyond the tunnel felt suddenly like another hemisphere. She remembered a rumor, the kind told at bars, the mural eye painted in a year someone went missing. Such stories usually fit into the architecture of sleeplessness and were harmless. Here, under the wet tiles, rumor felt like a map. The mural's painted iris seemed to focus differently now, catching a sliver of the phone light and throwing it back as a tiny, uncanny twin of the living pinpricks. She did not see pupils or lids. She saw reflections that contained more than light. In one small blink, her phone showed her a face that was not hers yet felt intimately remembered. An adolescent turning a wrong corner, a laugh cut in half, a promise not kept. The images were fragments, suggestive rather than explicit, like photographs developed imperfectly. Each blink of the dots gave her another shard of memory, placing private images next to public tile, mixing past mistakes with present surveillance, until she couldn't tell which belonged to who. She tried to name the sensation, observed, catalogued, marked, Words felt clumsy here, blunt tools that scraped. The eyes did not threaten in any traditional way. They proposed instead. They arranged themselves to suggest questions, to prod memory. An urge prickled. Count with them, answer them. Let them finish whatever arithmetic they had begun. She had an inexplicable fear of making the wrong response. Each time she counted aloud, unsure and trembling, the eyes blinked differently, sometimes approving, sometimes impatient, as if an unseen ledger drew closer to completion. A distant sound sliced the tunnel's hush, the city clock tower striking the quarter hour far above streets and roofs. The tone threaded through the darkness, and the eyes adjusted their tempo to it, sinking into a pattern that felt like old, mechanical patience. Time was no longer a backdrop, but a player, its chime an external metronome that the eyes used to pace themselves. Maya realized then that being watched had less to do with eyes and more to do with schedules, appointments with things that kept precise hours. She thought of running, of abandoning the tunnel to its rituals, but movement made the dots rearrange. When she walked faster, the lights leaned and seemed to catalog distance. When she stopped, they hovered close, expectant. At one turn, a faint flash, an instant of failing overhead, revealed what she had feared would be revealed, not faces, but shallow indentations in tile, seeded with small, glossy beads. In the second after the flash, the beads were eyes again, and her brain offered two plausible explanations and clung to neither. She stepped out of the tunnel into a rainy street that smelled of diesel and newspaper. The city's noise felt aggressive with normalcy cars, a distant siren, a dog barking, insisting that nothing unusual had occurred. Yet the sense of being tallied did not dissolve with distance. Later, at home, the quiet amplified. Her apartment offered familiar corners and the mundane geometry of furniture, but the dark in her hallway now seemed to contain the same patient pinpricks, only sparser, like the memory of something that had been catalogued and then set aside. She told two friends the next day. The story came out thin and doubtful against coffee steam. Their faces were kindly, unalarmed, and offered rational fixes, exhausted nerves, a trick of light, a neighbor's art project. Their normalcy felt like a door closed against her. That night, she checked every reflective surface: spoons, the black TV, the glass of a framed photograph. An eye would appear in a corner, a distant pinprick that blinked in a rhythm that felt like counting down or up. When she covered the mirror with a towel, she could still see the rhythm in the back of her lids. She began to notice patterns in the distribution of the eyes, not random, but ordered into clusters near places where promises had been made in her own life, doorways she had closed on, benches where apologies stalled, the mural where a neighbor once painted an impossible eye. Their arithmetic was personal, mapping an invisible balance sheet she had been carrying without realizing. The thought was terrible in its intimacy. Perhaps the eyes were not some external jury, but the ledger of attention itself, keeping score of the small omissions that make up a life. A week later, her phone buzzed with an anonymous text. 2 characters, neither friendly nor threatening, just numerals. She stared until the numbers blurred, and the room slid into the old counting rhythm she had tried to outrun. Outside, a storm moved in on precise streets. She felt the city's scheduled hours like ribs around her chest. She liked to believe she could choose to ignore the count. The next night, unable to sleep, she found herself by the tunnel again. And when the lights blinked out, she did not run. The eyes opened, as patient and innumerable as ever, and for the first time, she began to answer.